Okay, so now the points that are tracking the corners of our doors here are level, and I'll just confirm that. I'll tap spacebar, go to the side view and tap spacebar again. I'll just frame up with those corner points selected, and you can see that these are now an equal distance to the bottom of the screen, and everything looks pretty squared up. And so what I want to do now is bring in some geometry to try and represent this scene a little bit better, or to put some sort of physical presence for this background footage in our 3D scene. So to do that, I'm just going to go up and pick a NURBS plane, and now I'll just come over to this view, and I think we brought one in. Yep, we sure did. Okay, and I'm going to come down to make NURBS plane, and I'm just going to make it 100 wide with a length ratio of 1. That means that it's 100 wide and 100 deep, 100 long, I guess. Which means, because we're using centimeters as our units of measurement, that this is now a meter by a meter, or a meter by a meter, estimating that from here to here is 2 meters. So now what I want to do is I'll also increase the patches of U and V to 10, and I'll also, making sure that that's selected, I'll come to the scale attribute, and I'll just scale this object up until it looks like it is butting quite nicely with the wall here. And now, if we I'll keep that selected just so we can see it better. Now, if we come back along the timeline, you can see that here it looks like it might be creeping a little bit further away from the wall. And if we go up here, we can see that it looks like it might be creeping a little bit up the wall. Now, this is a result of us tracking this point, and if you remember, this was perhaps not the best point to track because it didn't have much contrast and it didn't have a lot of information per frame. And so our coordinate system, particularly our world origin, might be off slightly. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back to this point, and I want this floor, this ground plane, to be butted up exactly on the points where that define this door. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to hit the W key to go to translate, and I'm going to hold down D and C for curve snapping, and I'm just going to snap to this curve here, and I'm snapping the pivot point, by the way, but I'm going to snap to this curve here, and I'm just going to drag it to this very edge of how far I can drag it. And what that has done is it has moved our pivot point right over to this edge, and so now it's we're actually moving around this point. With our pivot point there, I'm now going to hold down the V key so that I'm snapping to vertices or points, and I'm just going to middle mouse, well, first I'm going to click on the X axis just so that we're only moving in that X axis, and I'm going to middle mouse click and wiggle the mouse around where one of these locators is on this door. And you can see that now we have put this floor up against where this locator is on the x-axis. But surprisingly, it looks like we have jumped away from the wall. As I said, this is the result of the origin point perhaps not being mapped in quite the correct area. but I know that this is now correct, or at least this point of our plane is now correct in the x-axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab it in Y and move it up until it is butting up against that wall nicely. And you can see if we move back that it stays in the right place, and if we move forward it's more or less in the right place now. It's moving with our floor properly. Now it's still not perfect, because if I switch to scale and I just scale this plane out, when we come back to here we can see that at the very extremes of this plane it is coming away from the wall down here. And that would probably be a result of one of the other axes being slightly off. Perhaps it's the x-axis and this needs to rotate up slightly, or it could be the y-axis and it needs to rotate around the origin just a little bit, or it could even be the z-axis, who knows. But you can see that it is fairly close all the way along to about this point here. And so this is good enough for just sort of our simulation purposes. Now the next thing that I want to do is tackle this pole here. So I'm just going to get a NURB cylinder, and with the NURB cylinder I'm just going to, I might just come down here. I'm not sure how wide this particular cylinder is. I'll try 10. Yeah, 10's not too bad, but I think I'll try an 8 for now. Alright, now let's see. Okay, I'll sorry, just thinking to myself, which is always a good thing when you're instructing people. Okay, I'll just I just want to frame up on this cylinder at the moment, and even though we are in this animated RZ camera, we can zoom up on a single frame like this, and we won't ruin anything, because the minute that we move this timeline it will go back to where we were. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold down D again to move my pivot point. I'm just going to click on the green y-axis. I'm going to hold down C, and I'm just going to drag down to the bottom of our cylinder. That's just so that our cylinder is has its I was going to say origin point. That's a bit of a computer games term, but our pivot point is right at the bottom here. So with that there, I'm just going to, again, I'll just move this around, and you'll notice that our camera goes back to where it's supposed to be. I'm just going to click on this green arrow for the y-axis, hold down C, and I'm just going to middle mouse around one of these curved lines here. And what that means is that this is now on our origin or on our ground plane, and the ground plane that we've fixed up and made sort of level with these doors. So now with that done, I'm going to move the cylinder in X, and I'm also, if I can get it, okay, what I might do actually is I'm going to control click on the y-axis, and you can see that the square is flattened out like that, sort of level with our ground plane. By control clicking on an axis, that means that we're no longer going to move in that axis when we sort of free move around. And what I'll do is I'll just drag this cylinder until it looks like it's pretty much overlapping that point there, and I'll just come down to the NURB cylinder inputs, and I'll make the height ratio something more like 10. And you can see that that has actually stretched our height in both axes. So instead of actually doing it here, I'll take this back to 2, because our origin point, or sorry, our pivot point is at the base there. I'll actually come up to scale, and or I'll use the scale widget and stretch this up a bit. Now we can see that it is on either side of this this post. So I'm just going to uniformly scale until we're more or less overlapping this post here, and then I'll just sort of bring this up. And you can see this more or less covers our post quite well. Now if we move back, at certain points it looks like it's covering it fine. In fact, I might move this over a little bit. But there are other points where it seems to be, and you can see it here, it's leaning off to the left there. And if we as we move around, it seems to be leaning to the left. So what we could do is actually come in here and with our rotate, I'm just going to get to the point where I think it's leaning the most far out. I think that's about it there. Now I know from the frames up here, and if I just sort of go up to here, that it's more or less alright when we're straight on. We might be able to just sort of move it just a little bit over, and I'll move my mouse a little bit further away from the widget just so that we can get a slightly better, or a slightly finer level of control. But looking more or less straight on, it is more or less fine when rotated around the Z-axis, which means that if we come back to this frame, the axis that we probably need to fix up is this X-axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate that back in the X-axis, and again I'll just get a little bit further away from the widget for a little bit more fine control, and that looks about right. And we can check if we move all the way over to here. Now I can see it's sticking out a bit there, but it's also sticking out a bit on this side, so it might just be a little bit too wide on the scale. But if I move back to this point, you can see that it still covers that post. And so you can see that we have a fairly good stand-in for that post. And if we wanted to, we could go back to scale, and we just extend that further up. And you can see here that with it extending a little bit further, we have a little bit better indication of where this post is sitting. So again, I'll come back to this, and I will rotate it back just a touch. And there. And now if we check, we can see that it does. It overlaps that post very closely. And so there we go. And you can also do this with the ground plane to fix up this this part here. Just sort of move that out like that. Okay, so we can get a fairly good stand-in geometry for our scene. And we'll be adding to this in the next lesson. I'll be adding in these doors, putting in these walls, and maybe these columns and this this bench box thing here.